Before the sun rose over Maple Crest Estates, before alarms buzzed or dogs barked or people poured cereal into bowls, something unsettling was already unfolding on a quiet street. A grown woman crouched in front of someone else's door, a carton in one hand, a fistful of raw eggs in the other. And she wasn't hiding out of fear. She was hiding out of spite. That moment would unravel an entire neighborhood, and it would test one woman who had spent her whole life learning how to stay calm in a storm. The woman holding the eggs was Marla Knox, the longtime head of the Maple Crest HOA. People whispered that she ran the association the way someone guards a throne. Rules were her weapons. Fines were her shield. And any homeowner who questioned her found themselves on the receiving end of a warning letter before sunset. But that morning, Marla wasn't sending letters. She had chosen a different method. One she believed no one would ever catch, at exactly 5:37 a.m. With the sky still navy blue, she crept across a neighbor's yard. Her steps were slow, her shoulders tucked in tight, her face twisted with a bitterness she no longer bothered to hide. The house she targeted belonged to Riley Carter, 42-year-old data analyst who had lived in the neighborhood for 3 years. Riley wasn't loud. She wasn't flashy. She didn't break rules. She simply asked questions. Reasonable ones. Questions that made people in the neighborhood nod quietly, while pretending they didn't hear. That alone was enough to turn her into Marla's enemy. Riley planted flowers in colors not listed in the HOA's approved landscape palette. She challenged fines that made no sense. She attended HOA meetings and refused to be silenced when policies felt unfair. Her calm voice had become a threat to someone who relied on fear to maintain control. So that morning, Marla decided to send a message. Not through paperwork. Not through warnings. Through eggs. She lifted her arm. She threw the first one. The egg burst with a wet smack against the wooden trim beside Riley's front door. Marla didn't know that inside. She wasn't startled by a sound exactly. It was more of a tug in her chest, the kind that tells you something is wrong before your mind understands why. Riley slipped on her robe, tightened the belt, and walked barefoot down the hallway. Her steps were soft against the floor, her breath steady in her chest. She peeked through the peephole. What she saw didn't make sense at first. Her HOA president, her neighbor, her adversary, kneeling in her yard at dawn like a character from a story gone wrong, holding another egg ready to throw again. Riley opened the door. The egg left Marla's hand, but missed Riley by a foot. It exploded on the welcome mat. The morning air grew heavy in an instant. Riley's voice came out sharper than she intended. "What are you doing?" Marla jerked upright. Her face flushed. Her chest rose and fell like she'd been caught stealing something she couldn't afford to be seen holding. For a heartbeat. But Marla was not a woman who apologized. "You think you're smarter than everyone?" she snapped. "You argue in every meeting. You question everything I do." "I'm tired of it," Riley blinked. She expected denial. She didn't expect honesty this raw or this ugly. "You're throwing eggs at my house because I planted flowers you didn't like?" she asked. Marla gripped the carton tighter. "You're ruining the neighborhood with your attitude. People like you never fit into communities like this." The weight of those words sank deep. It wasn't about flowers. It wasn't about rules. And Riley heard exactly what Marla was trying not to say out loud. "Put the eggs down, Marla," Riley said quietly. "This isn't going the way you think." Across the street, a door opened. A neighbor stepped onto his porch. It was Ben Jacobs, a retired firefighter who often left early for morning walks. He held his phone up without saying a word. Neighbors who never stepped outside before sunrise started peeking through curtains. The neighborhood wasn't asleep anymore. And Marla finally realized she wasn't hidden in the dark. Her face tightened. Her voice rose. "You don't scare me?" But the tremor in her tone told a different story. Riley didn't move. Didn't raise her voice. Didn't step backward or forward. She simply stood still, rooted, grounded, calm in a way. Marla didn't understand. Years of training do that. Years of discipline. Years of learning to control your breathing when someone else loses theirs. Marla had no idea that Riley carried that kind of strength. The kind that doesn't need to shout or threaten to be felt. Riley spoke once more, her voice even. "Stop. Now." Marla didn't stop. She lifted another egg. Her hand shook. The carton rattled. A quiet hum filled the air, Ben's phone recording. Curiosity growing across the street. Windows opening. Whispers spreading. This wasn't a simple petty act anymore. It was something larger. Something the neighborhood had been waiting for without realizing it. Because for years, Marla had been the voice everyone feared. And at that moment, she was the one violating the very rules she enforced by the time Riley went back inside to clean off her porch. The damage was already done. Not the mess. Not the yoke. The truth. The neighborhood had seen the person who claimed to protect their community reveal who she truly was. But to understand why this moment cracked everything open, you have to know how Marla and Riley's quiet war actually began. And it wasn't with eggs. It started months earlier. In a meeting room beside the Willow Creek Library, where a single question turned a peaceful neighborhood into a battleground, and that question came from Riley. The meeting room beside the Willow Creek Library was always too cold, too bright, and too quiet. People usually came in with polite smiles and left with tight ones, clutching envelopes that meant fines were coming. When Riley first moved into the neighborhood, she attended these meetings with a hopeful spirit, believing communities worked best when people spoke honestly. That hope faded the moment she raised her hand during her very first meeting. She had been sitting near the back, listening as the board rattled off violations. A family fined because their child left a scooter on the walkway for one afternoon. A couple warned because their shutters were painted. A shade not approved by the HOA's color scheme. Single father. Told to remove his small garden bench because it wasn't listed as an acceptable outdoor feature? People sat stiffly. Pretending not to hear, no one dared question anything, but Riley did. She lifted her hand calmly and asked, "Can someone explain what harm these things are causing? They're not damaging property. They're just part of life." Hey. The room fell silent. Every head shifted, not toward Riley, but toward the woman seated at the front, Marla Knox. Her chin lifted. Her smile tightened. A cold shadow passed over her expression. "The rules exist for a reason," she replied. "If we allow exceptions, everything falls apart." "But shouldn't the rules be reasonable?" Riley asked. Some people bit their lips. Others stared at the table. A few nodded without meaning to. It was the first time many of them had heard someone say aloud what they'd whispered in private for years. Marla's eyes hardened. "This is how we maintain order. If you don't like it," she said slowly, "you might have chosen the wrong neighborhood." That was the moment everything changed. After that night, Riley's mailbox became a lightning rod. A letter about her flower palette. A warning about her trash bin, even though she brought it in the same day as everyone else. A notice accusing her of hosting unapproved gatherings. Even though it was just her sister visiting, the fines were small but steady. Like taps meant to remind her she was stepping out of line. Neighbors warned her Tom, who lived 2 streets over, once leaned on his fence and said quietly, "She doesn't forget things. You challenge her once, she'll make it her mission." Riley had only smiled and replied, "Maybe someone needs to." But tension grew like roots beneath the soil, spreading where no one could see, and in the weeks before the egging, Marla started escalating in ways that felt petty and personal. She blocked Riley's appeal forms. She ignored her emails. She sent passive-aggressive reminders to the entire neighborhood about residents who think they're exceptions to community standards. People felt the shift. They saw the pressure building. Riley stayed polite on the outside. But deep down, she knew the conflict was no longer about rules. It was about control. By the time Marla threw that first egg at dawn, the rivalry was already boiling, and yet the confrontation that morning didn't shock Riley nearly as much as what followed. By noon, word had spread across Maple Crest Estates. Some neighbors pretended to be outraged. Some whispered with a strange kind of relief. and some felt something they hadn't felt in years. Permission. Permission to speak up. Permission to question. Permission to finally say, enough. One neighbor, Valerie, told her later, it was like watching the queen bee finally lose her sting. But Riley didn't want revenge. She wanted accountability. She knew, though, that people like Marla didn't back down. If anything, they doubled down. And she was right. That afternoon, while Riley wiped the last streak of dried yolk from her door, her daughter Lily stood nearby, wide-eyed. Why did she do that? Lily asked. Riley paused. I don't know exactly, she said gently. But some people get scared when others don't let themselves be pushed around. Are you scared of her? Lily asked softly. Riley shook her head. No, I've been through worse than a woman with eggs. She didn't explain the years of discipline she had learned. She didn't explain how she had spent her teen years in a martial arts dojo, training until sweat stung her eyes and her muscles throbbed. She didn't mention the lessons from her instructor who taught her that power wasn't about winning fights, but avoiding them. She simply smiled for her, a daughter's sake. But the reality was clear. This wasn't over, not even close. When the video from Ben's porch hit social media that evening, the neighborhood's quiet tension burst open. Comments rolled in faster than anyone could read them. This HOA president is out of control. How is she still in charge? That woman in the robe looks like she could stand her ground against anything. Riley didn't post the video. But she couldn't stop what came next. By sunset, residents she barely knew were messaging her, asking if she was okay. Others apologized for not speaking up sooner. A few confessed they'd been fined unfairly too, but never complained because they feared retaliation. The truth was coming out in waves, but Marla wasn't the type to retreat when cornered. Pride was a dangerous thing in her hands, and the next confrontation wouldn't happen in the shadows of dawn. It would happen in broad daylight, in front of the entire neighborhood. With every phone camera ready, that moment would push Riley to the edge of her control, testing everything she had learned, and it would prove once and for all who the real threat in Maple Crest Estates truly was. 3 days after the egging incident, the neighborhood felt strangely unsettled. People still mowed their lawns, kids still played basketball in driveways, sprinklers still clicked across trimmed grass, but underneath all that normalcy, something had shifted. The polite smiles people used to give one another now held curiosity, and in some cases, fear. Riley felt it everywhere she went. When she jogged past the park, a few parents nodded at her with a newfound respect. At the grocery store, someone whispered, "That's her," before looking away too quickly. Even the mailman paused before handing her the day's envelopes, as if expecting her to say something wise or powerful. She didn't want any of this. She only wanted her home to feel like a home again. But Marla wasn't ready to let the neighborhood move on. And the moment she stepped out into the open again, things took a turn. It happened on a warm Saturday afternoon. Riley was unloading groceries from her car, the sun beating down on her shoulders. She set a bag on the ground and reached for another. When footsteps pounded across the lawn behind her, she turned. Marla was storming toward her. Her hair was messy. Her face was flushed. Her fists were balled so tightly, the skin around her knuckles faded to white. "You think you've won?" she spat. Riley inhaled slowly. "I'm not trying to win, Marla. You humiliated me," Marla said. "In front of the neighborhood? In front of the entire internet?" Riley set the next grocery bag aside and faced her directly. "You did that yourself." The words came out calm, but they landed like a strike. Marla stepped closer, invading the space between them. "You undermine me? You question everything I do. You don't show me the respect a president deserves." A breeze rustled the trees. A screen door creaked open somewhere behind Riley. She could feel eyes on them again. Ben set down his morning paper and stood up on his porch. Cynthia froze mid-yard work, her trowel halfway to the soil. Phones appeared in hands like a reflex. The neighborhood was no longer afraid to watch. Marla lifted her chin. "You think you're some kind of hero, don't you? Someone who's above the rules." "I follow the rules," Riley replied. "I just don't follow fear." Marla's rage deepened. "You always play the victim. People like you always do. Riley's jaw tightened. She didn't want her children hearing this kind of talk. She didn't want them seeing this kind of behavior. But she also knew that fear only grew when silence fed it. "This isn't about being a victim," Riley said softly. "This is about you trying to control people. And that control is slipping." Marla's hand rose suddenly, not quite in a strike, but close enough to make gasps ripple across the street. Riley shifted her stance. Barely a movement, feet planting, shoulders softening, body ready, a lifetime of practice settling into her bones. "Don't," Riley said. Just one word. Quiet, steady, stronger than a shout. Marla froze. Her hand trembled in the air before she snatched it back. The neighbors, watching, let out breaths they didn't know they were holding. Someone whispered. She didn't even flinch. Riley stepped closer, her voice low enough that only Marla could hear it. "You want me to lose control so you can twist this against me? I won't give you that." Marla backed up a step, then another. Her face twisted, contorted by humiliation she couldn't swallow. "This isn't over," she hissed. Riley shook her head. "It already is. You just don't want to see it." Behind her, a few neighbors clapped, not because they wanted drama, but because someone had finally stood up to a force they'd feared for years. Marla turned sharply and marched back across the street. Her shoes hit the pavement hard, her posture stiff, her pride bruised deeper than any physical blow could have managed. She slammed her front door loud, enough to echo across the cold --sack. Riley exhaled slowly. Inside her chest, adrenaline still pulsed. She knew she had been seconds away from defending herself physically, and she hated that the situation had come that close. Later, when she carried the groceries inside, her son Jonah stood in the hallway waiting. "Mom," he said, worry in his voice, "what's going to happen next?" Riley set the last bag on the counter and looked at him with the same calm she'd shown outside. "I'll stay ready," she said. "But I won't let her drag me into anger. Is she dangerous?" Jonah asked. Riley paused. "She's angry. And angry people think they're dangerous. But danger and anger aren't the same thing." Still, she knew Jonah's question wasn't baseless. Marla's pride had snapped twice now. People who feel their power slipping often reach for it in desperate ways. And Riley could feel something in the air. A building pressure. A storm preparing its next strike. That evening, as Riley sat with her daughter and son watching a movie, a knock came at the door. It was Ben. He held his phone out with a troubled expression. "Riley," he said, "you need to see this." She took the phone. Her stomach tightened as she watched. The video from the driveway confrontation was online. Not just posted by neighbors. Picked up by local news networks. Shared across multiple platforms, and it wasn't slowing down. Thousands of comments poured in. Riley handled that like a warrior who egged her house. "Fire her immediately. This HOA president needs to be removed." Riley felt the air leave her lungs. This wasn't just a neighborhood issue anymore. This was public, and the more attention the videos gained, the more unstable Marla would become. Ben shifted nervously. "You know she won't take this lightly." Riley nodded. "I know." There was no going back now, and the real fallout was only beginning. By Monday, Maple Crest Estates wasn't a neighborhood anymore. It was a pressure cooker. Every driveway conversation, every dog walk greeting, every glance from a porch felt loaded. People acted normal on the surface, but underneath they were waiting. Waiting to see who would snap first, waiting to see what the board would do, waiting to see whether the woman they once feared would fight for her, power or crumble under it. Riley tried to carry on with her routine. She woke early. She made breakfast for the kids. She logged into work like it was any other day, but the moment she opened her inbox, she saw messages that reminded her nothing was normal. Coworkers she barely knew wrote, "Is this really you?" Her manager asked if she needed time to recover from the situation. Someone even attached a link to a discussion thread where strangers debated whether Riley was the example of calm strength or someone provoking drama. She closed the laptop and rubbed her temples. Her life had become a conversation without her permission, but across the street, things were worse. Marla's blinds stayed closed for days. Her car never moved. Neighbors whispered that they heard shouting inside her house. Others said she had been calling residents privately, begging for support, claiming she was being unfairly targeted. Yet, no one was willing to stand beside her publicly. The video had shown too much. Still, the silence didn't mean surrender. It meant pressure building, and the HOA board felt it too. On Thursday afternoon, Riley received an email that made her stomach tighten. Emergency HOA meeting mandatory. Attendance for all residents, no explanation. No agenda. Just a time and place. The room filled quickly that evening. People squeezed into chairs, lined up against walls, crowded near the exit. Everyone held phones. Everyone watched the front table where the board members sat stiffly. Riley walked in quietly, choosing a seat near the middle. People nodded to her. A few whispered supportive words. Even the ones who had avoided her for months treated her with cautious respect now. At the front, the board members looked exhausted, their faces pinched, their hands restless. They weren't leaders tonight. They were referees waiting for a fight. Marla sat on the far end of the table. Papers stacked neatly in front of her, spine straight, face set like stone. Her expression wasn't just angry, it was wounded. And a wounded person with pride is unpredictable. Her gaze flicked across the room before landing on Riley. Not with fear, not with guilt. With resentment so sharp it could cut glass, the board secretary cleared his throat. "We've received a significant number of complaints about recent events," he began. "We're here to address leadership concerns." A voice from the back cut in before he could continue. "Let's stop pretending," someone said. It was Trevor, the neighbor who never hesitated to speak his mind. "We all saw the videos. We all know why we're here." Murmurs swelled through the crowd. Marla's jaw twitched. "This is being blown out of proportion," she snapped. "I was provoked. Certain residents have been actively trying to undermine this community." Riley stayed silent. She didn't need to defend herself. The video had already spoken, a hand raised. It was Valerie, normally soft-spoken. "I'm sorry. But throwing eggs at someone's house and trying to start a fight isn't leadership," she said quietly. "That's bullying." A wave of agreement swept through the room. A few residents clapped under their breath. Marla slammed her hand on the table. "I have served this community for 11 years. I have protected property values, enforced consistency, kept this place in order. And you're the only one who believes that anymore," someone else muttered. The board president finally stepped in. "Our concern is the trust of residents. It has been damaged." "That's because she made herself the problem," Trevor said. "She'll fine me $200 for leaving my grill out for a single afternoon." $200! And now we find out she's been vandalizing someone's home. Marla stood abruptly. That video was taken out of context. Ben's voice rose from the side. "I recorded the whole thing. There was no context missing." Her face flushed deep red. "You're all traitors. Every last one of you." Cynthia stepped forward from the back row. Her voice shook, but she spoke anyway. "I'm tired of being afraid to put a flower pot on my porch," she said. "I'm tired of my kids asking why we have to hide their toys. This isn't a community. It's a dictatorship." Soft gasps and approving nods followed. Riley felt her heart pound. Not from fear, but from the collective courage rising around her. This wasn't her fight anymore. It belonged to everyone who had stayed quiet too long. The board president looked around. "We must vote," he said. According to HOA bylaws, a president can be removed if resident confidence is lost. Marla's eyes widened. "You can't do this," she said. "I built this neighborhood." "No," Riley said gently. "The neighborhood built itself. You just forgot to let people live in it." The room grew still. Every resident watched the board. Ballots were passed out. People marked their decisions quickly. There was no hesitation. No uncertain hands. No second thoughts. When the board announced the result, the air felt different. By an overwhelming majority vote, the board president said, "Marla Knox is removed from her position as HOA president." The words hit the room like a final breath after years spent holding one in. No one cheered loudly. No one gloated. But relief washed over the crowd, like warm light finally breaking through clouds. People turned to Riley with grateful smiles. Some touched her shoulder gently. Others simply nodded at her with silent acknowledgement. She didn't stand. She didn't make a speech. She didn't say a single triumphant word. She just breathed. Because this wasn't victory. It was release. Marla gathered her papers with trembling hands. Her face twisted with rage, hurt, disbelief. She looked at Riley one last time. "This isn't finished," she whispered. Riley met her eyes calmly. "It is." Marla left the room, the door closing behind her with a final thud that echoed across the floor. The neighborhood had changed. Everything had changed. But the story wasn't done yet, because the true lesson, the one Riley had carried for years, still needed to be spoken. The one she hoped her children would remember. The night after the vote, Maple Crest Estates felt like a place learning how to breathe again. For the first time in years, people lingered outside without glancing nervously at Marla's windows. Conversations drifted across lawns with a lighter tone. Kids chased each other down sidewalks without parents calling them back in fear of rule violations. Riley sat on her front steps with a cup of tea, letting the quiet settle around her. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't relieved. She was simply absorbing the reality that something heavy had finally lifted her daughter. Lily stepped out and curled beside her. "Mom?" she asked softly. "Why didn't you ever fight her? You could have." Riley looked down at her small face, full of curiosity and innocence. "Yes," she said, "I could have. But fighting her would have made me just like her. She wanted me angry. She wanted proof that I was the problem." Lily considered this. "So strength isn't about hitting someone." "No," Riley answered. "Real strength is choosing not to when you know you don't need to." Across the street, Ben gave her a small wave. Cynthia walked by with her terrier and offered a smile filled with gratitude. Trevor nodded at her with pride. These were people who had lived under fear for too long, and now they finally seemed ready to step into something better. But while the neighborhood began healing, the rest of the city was just waking up to the story. The next morning, Riley's phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from strangers across the state. Requests for interviews. People calling her an example of quiet strength and calm resistance. Podcasts discussing HOA power abuse. Parents sharing her story to teach their kids how to stay composed in conflict. Riley didn't want fame. She didn't want attention. She just wanted the chaos to settle. But stories have a way of growing without permission. Later that afternoon, Jonah walked into the kitchen, holding his tablet. "Mom," he said, "someone at school showed me a video of you. They said you're inspiring." Riley raised an eyebrow. "Inspiring how?" He shrugged. "You stayed calm. You didn't yell. You didn't fight. You just stood there." Riley couldn't help but laugh gently. "Years of training," she said, "and years of learning to breathe when someone wants you to break." But as much as Riley tried to return to normal life, she couldn't forget one thing. Marla's final words. "This isn't finished." Those words lingered like a shadow at the corner of every peaceful moment. Not a threat, but a reminder that people who lose power quickly often scramble for anything left to hold on to. For days, rumors spread. Some said Marla planned to move away. Others said she was filing complaints with the regional HOA council. A few whispered she was threatening defamation lawsuits against anyone who spoke up. But none of it reached Riley's door. Not one letter. Not one warning. Not one knock in the quiet hours. It was as if Marla Knox had deflated, and whatever pride she had left crumpled with her reign. One evening, a week after the vote, Riley watered the flower bed in front of her house. The same flower bed that had sparked so much tension. Bright pink zinnias, golden marigolds, indigo petunias. Colors that broke the rules but softened the world. Trevor walked by with his young daughter. He paused, looking at the flowers. "Funny," he said, "how these tiny things caused an earthquake." Riley smiled softly. "They're just flowers." "Sure," he said, "but sometimes small things show you big truths." That night, as Riley sat at the dinner table with her kids, she shared the lesson she hoped would stay with them long after this neighborhood chapter faded from memory. There will always be people who try to control others. She told them, people who use rules or titles or fear to make themselves feel powerful. Jonah leaned forward. So what do we do about them? Riley looked at him with steady eyes. You don't let them change who you are. You don't meet anger with anger. You don't shrink. You don't explode. You stay grounded. You stay patient. You stay calm enough to think clearly. Lily tilted her head. Like your karate? Riley nodded. Exactly like that. Power isn't about what you can do to someone. It's about what you can stop yourself from doing. The house fell quiet for a moment as those words settled deep, and there, in that calm silence, something important shifted. Riley realized that the real story wasn't about eggs or fines or HOA meetings. It wasn't even about her and Marla. It was about the moment a community realized fear only works when people let it. It was about the quiet force of self-control. It was about the strength of standing tall without raising a fist. The truth was simple. Anger wins in the moment. But steady, patient resolve wins the future. And as long as Riley lived in Maple Crest Estates, everyone knew one thing for certain. Control without compassion crumbles. And calm does not mean weak. Calm means powerful. The story of Riley Carter reminded her neighbors and thousands of strangers watching online that dignity can be louder than shouting, that fairness matters more than authority, and that a steady voice can break down walls that fear built. If there was anything to carry from her story, it was this. Being strong does not mean fighting harder. It means standing firm when someone expects you to fall apart, and that is what changed the neighborhood forever.